Hello everybody, welcome to this introduction to Adobe Audition. In this brief overview, we're going to kind of take a look at some of the buttons and features and how you can use this program for any project you're really trying to work on, whether it's music, working on audio for podcasting, working on audio for your video projects, or just as a hobbyist. So for this, I'm going to show you the two different main workspaces that you'll be working in. One's called Waveform, which is a destructive editing, and one's called Multitrack, which is a non-destructive editing. So for our project, I'm going to cover a lot of things, so don't worry if you don't retain all this information at first. I just want to cover a good amount so I can get you started. So first things first, if your project doesn't look like mine in your workspace, go to Window, Workspace, and Default Settings. And you should have something that looks similar to mine. If not, go ahead and click Default. And we should all be on the same page. Secondly, you want to go to File, Preferences, and then we'll go to Audio Hardware. So if you have an external microphone set up like I do, I have my Scarlett Solo hooked up. That's what it's going to show up here. So if you have your own internal mic, you want to use that for your computer, go ahead and set that to your settings there. And also your audio channel mapping. You want to make sure that you have the device channels set to the same thing. So you'd have your, for me, it's going to be a mono. So I have my input set to my Scarlett. So I have left and right set to the Scarlett. Once that's all set up, we're ready to go. So I'm going to cancel out of here because I already set this up. So first things first, I'm going to just start a random recording. So to do that, you have some features at the bottom here. A lot of them are grayed out until we get to our multi-track editing feature. So I'm just going to record something first. Example, say we're doing a podcast. So I'm going to hit record, and I have to title my project. So I'm going to call this, I don't know, Recording Demo 1. So for the sample rate, I'm going to set this to 44.1. That's a decent standard to kind of go by when it's dealing with audio. When you're dealing with video, you kind of want it to have a higher sample rate of like 48, but we'll get into that stuff later on too. So for this channel, since it's only my voice, I'm going to keep it as mono. And the bit depth, I'm going to leave it at 32-bit floating. So I'm going to say OK. Hello, and welcome to this introduction to audio recording and editing. Hope you enjoy. So let's say we just did an entire podcast, but unfortunately I have one section here that has a cough and I have some noise in the beginning. We can get rid of those things easily in Adobe Audition. So there's a few different ways. One, you can select your area by just clicking and dragging. And you'll notice this tool at the very top is our selection tool. I can select an area I want to get rid of and just simply press delete. So I'll play the recording before and after. So here's, hello, and welcome to this introduction to audio recording and editing. Hope you enjoy. It's a lot of empty space and a lot of background noise. So when I hit delete, recording and editing. Hope you enjoy. We got rid of the cough, but there's still like a slight noise in the background. There's different tools in here we can use. We can select an area, go to our effects, and go to noise reduction / restoration. So we can capture the noise, and Adobe can learn from this area of noise of what we don't want, right? We go to the same thing. I know this is going to be a lot right now. You'll be like, what are you doing? We'll get to that in a second. So it basically takes an audio print of what we just recorded, and we tell it we don't want this kind of sound throughout the recording. So we can choose how much we want the noise to be taken out. And once you're satisfied, you can hit apply, and you can go over your whole project like this. So say you have a noisy fan in the background, or you recorded in a room that isn't quite soundproofed. You can use this to actually reduce the amount of noise that's in that recording. So I wouldn't have it this much. Let's just, for example, say 16. And you'll notice our audio file kind of changed a little bit. That's because it got rid of the noise. So I'm just hitting Command Z on the Mac to undo, or you can go to Edit, undo that way, or redo. So let's play before and after. Hello, and welcome to this introduction to audio recording and editing. Hope you enjoy. Then I'm going to undo the noise recording. Hello, and welcome to this introduction to audio recording and editing. Hope you enjoy. It's very subtle, but it did get rid of a lot of background noise. You can also make adjustments to the overall sound level by adjusting the gain. To do that, there's this little knob here. So you'd make your selection of what audio source you want to reduce or increase. To the right, you'll see this whole bar. It's indicating the volume level. So in digital recording, you do not want to go to 0 or above because that's clipping. That's bad. It's distortion. So you want to get ideally between 3 and 6 decibels, dB. And to do that, you make your selection. And with this knob, you can drag to the right or to the left. And it's increasing the gain. Sometimes it's called trim, but in most programs they call it gain. But if you're looking at hardware, they also refer to it as a trim knob, meaning how much noise is being let in. So this is the digital version. We're increasing the gain, so making this quieter. Hello, and welcome to this introduction. So notice it's a lot lower than what it started off as. So this is a very useful tool if you have a recording that there's just certain sections that are too loud. So what we're talking about now is dynamic range. Mind you, I'm not expecting you to retain all of this. This is just things I want to put out there so you kind of get an understanding of what some of these things are and how they function. So now that we have a recording also, these tools are available. So you have your play, stop, rewind, record. You also have these zoom functions. So I can scale up the image. Now this isn't adjusting the sound, it's just how we can visually see it. So you can make it larger or smaller if there's small details we want to focus on. You can also use some of the other features on here. If you have a mouse, you can scroll, or if you have a laptop that has the touchpad function, you can use your fingers to pinch and zoom. So I can get in and eliminate small little things I don't want. You can zoom back out. You'll notice at the top there's this bar that's changing. That's another way you can view your project. So I can zoom in with this. I can also scroll to the left and right. So I can pan. So when I move my cursor over the center of it, it becomes a little hand, and that allows me to move this around. So I know that was a lot to cover. Don't worry, we'll go back over all this in a second. I just kind of want to show you what some of the features are and how they work. So in this waveform, it's called destructive editing. So any changes I make in this portion of this program affect it when I go to the multi-track view. So let's do that now. Let's make a brand new recording. We're going to go to File, New, Multi-Track Session. I'm going to label this Multi Demo. Again, I'm going to leave the default settings how they are. I'm going to leave the sample rate at 40/1, and I'm going to leave the master track at stereo. I'm going to say OK. We'll get back to that window in a second here. So it looks similar in your multi-track view, but notice there's a lot more tracks that are set up from the beginning. So you have your master track, which controls the overall sound of your entire project. So anything I apply to this track affects everything. You have your individual tracks, which are just that. They're their own individual tracks. You'll notice on here, they have different little letters, an M, an S, and an R. So that stands for mute, solo, and record. So if I'm recording something new, I can mute or solo it. So this example, I'm going to actually bring in some instrumentation. So I have a instrumental, and we're going to just bring in some drums. So this should be a stereo track. You'll notice when I can bring audio files into my project a few different ways. I can do like I just did, where I drag it from the desktop. You can also choose it from your folder here. You can select my recordings through this folder. I can drag it in, or you can go to File, Import, and then find your file that way. So there's 3 different ways you can bring it into Adobe Audition. So I have a drum track. Let's just play this real fast. Now you'll notice at the very bottom of this, I have a little indicator showing me what my audio levels are. Notice they're not going past -3. That's what we want. We don't want it distorting. So just like we had in our other window, you have a different form of viewing your WAV file. You can use the same hand tool at the top to scroll. If you grab one of the corners, you can zoom out, or if you pinch, you can zoom in. You can also utilize your mouse or your touchpad to zoom in and zoom out. So if you have headphones on, you'll hear this. You can pan to the left, to the right, and holding down Option and clicking, it will bring it back to its default setting there. I can also control the volume, so it's quieter and louder. Now it's distorting. But notice when I make changes in this portion of the program, it's called non-destructive editing. So any changes I make, I can bring back. So let's say I wanted to, for some reason, remove half of this. So I'll select it and hit delete. Oh no, I just deleted my audio. Don't worry, because we're in non-destructive editing, we can bring it all back. So now at the very top, more of our tools are available to us to use. So we have our selection tool, our slip tool, our razor tool, and our move tool. So I'm going to choose the move tool. Now I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Now notice when I go to the edge, our move tool turns into this little bracket. That allows us to zoom out or bring pieces back. So I cut off half of this instrumentation, right? So I can bring it back. Boom, it's still there. It hasn't been deleted. This is non-destructive editing. Now, had I done this and deleted it in the waveform view, so I'll double click this audio file and it'll open in the waveform view. And I make any changes here, I will not be able to bring it back. So if I select, hit delete, it's going to give me a warning. Any changes I make here will affect the multi-track view. So I'm going to say OK. So now if we go back to multi-track, we'll notice even though it's expanded out, our audio's gone. That's because in the waveform view, it's destructive editing. So anything I do there affects this. So that's why it's important to know the difference. So when we're editing, ideally, you want to work in multi-track view. So to bring it back, I'd have to go to waveform and say Command Z to undo that change. And now it's back. So another thing you can see that's a little different, when I zoom in, you'll have two different lines. So the top line is your volume. So just like how we had a gain in the other window, the waveform window, when I move this little bar either up or down, you'll see the decibel level changing. So the volume is changing, but because it's non-destructively, I can bring it back. I can make it louder, and I can undo that. And any changes I make, you can see in the very bottom left corner here, is our history window. So similar to Photoshop, you have a history window. Any changes you make show there. Same thing with Adobe Audition. So I have my volume, and if I zoom back in a little closer, you have your pan. So notice, just like how we had moved with the slider, you have the same control with this. And why would you use these bars versus just using this little knob? Well, for something later on we'll learn about, it's called automation. So if you want to automate your project, meaning, let's say we have a video project, we're recording, but when a person's talking, you want the music to go low and the volume of the person speaking to be the same, you can use automation to tell the volume, at this point, I want you to get slightly more low, more silent, so the vocals can stand through, so the dialogue could stand through. So you use automation in that, or any music recording you want, you can use automation. But again, I'm not expecting you to remember all this stuff just at once. I just want to kind of throw it out there so you understand what you can do. So let's bring in another piece of this song. So I'm going to bring in some guitars. Just going to drag it from my desktop. It's going to ask me, you know, it's a different sample rate than what the project is. Is it okay? I'll say yes. It's going to import that. And we're just going to slide this over, and maybe we'll bring in a piano. Again, it's going to prompt me, hey, different sample rate. Is it okay? Yes. So now if I hit play, I'm gonna scroll over. So let's say we want to edit our project because the volume's not where we want it to be. The drums are okay, but everything else is too loud. Or maybe the drums are too loud. So how do we make this adjustment? Again, we can control the volume by bringing that down. The drums aren't so loud. Or if we want something specifically in the mix isn't sitting right, and we want to adjust the guitar, but it's just a certain section. So we can solo that by hitting the S. So now I'm only hearing the guitar. We haven't made any change to anything. We're just only soloing out that sound so we can focus on that. So you can expand this window if I go underneath these little sections here. So each little track is almost like a little secret little pull down window. Notice the cursor changes. So I can drag and expand. So I can change my default stereo output, meaning where this audio signal is being sent, which is usually to my headphones. If I had some monitors, some speakers, I can change it to go to those instead of just my headphones. Or in this case, I'm using it to my Focusrite device, which I'm recording in. So I'm having it go there instead of the default settings, which would be my computer's speakers or monitors. But this is where you can change where your sound goes to. Also, there's something called buses. Again, I'm not expecting you to remember all this, but in audio, you have your analog gear and your digital gear. Some call it auxes. Technically, it's a bus, but you're sending some of your audio signal to a different device or effect. Why would you use this? Well, for this example, we're going to look to our left here. There's something called an effects rack. So say your volume is too loud and we want to control the dynamic range, meaning how loud or silent something is. You can add something called a compressor. So we'll go here. We're going to choose an effect. We're going to say amplitude and compression. And under dynamics. So by default, Adobe Audition has some presets that you can utilize. They have all dynamic, active, auto gate, expanding, hard compression, hard limiting, medium compression, noise gate, soft clip. So when you're using a compressor, you're making stuff that's loud, more silent, and something that's quiet, more loud. So this is more compression. You have your attack and release. So when it comes to compression, again, I'm not expecting you to memorize all this just yet, but gating is basically when you're, limiting is when you're setting a level where you will not let sound past. Now compression, you can say how much of that effect you want to happen. Threshold is how much of that sound comes through. So for, 2 to 1, like almost like you're mixing some food together, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. You're saying, I want a little bit of audio to come through, but not everything. Threshold is saying how intensely do you want this effect to happen. Attack is saying how fast does this happen. So example, if you're recording drums versus a violin, you'll have a faster attack normally on the drums. You want the effect to happen quicker than you would on a violin or something. You want it to be slightly slower. So release is how long the compression lasts on it, how long that effect stays on that sound. And you have a makeup gain. Essentially, this is what this is. It says makeup. So we're compressing the sound, we're making stuff quiet, but you also want to still be able to hear it. So you're saying, all right, I want you to make the difference up. So I'm adding 19 decibels, that's what dB is, of compression, right? You're compressing it. I'm adding that much more gain back to it, so it brings the sound back up. So I'm gonna say, that's okay. Now you can do the same thing in your waveform. Remember, we're in Multitrack, which is non-destructive editing. In Waveform, you can add these same effects. So let's double click this track. So it opens it up by default in Waveform. I'm gonna compress just one section. So this is gonna be destructive editing. So we're gonna do the same thing. Under Effects, I'm gonna go down to Amplitude and Compression. dynamics, and we're going to say hard compression. I'm going to exaggerate this even more though. I'm going to crank this up to like 6. I'm going to mash this down negative. So it's saying, I want you to compress it this much. So the negative compression is how much you're compressing it. So we're going to just go extreme. I'm going to say we want it all really, really compressed. We want it to be really fast. We want the release to be slow. So it's going to last very long. And we're going to make up a little bit by adding 21 back. So taking away 56, making up by 21. It's a little confusing, but you'll see visually what I'm talking about. So I'm going to say apply. Now notice how the waveform changed. So I'm going to undo and redo. See how let me zoom in a little bit further. This one section looks really mashed. It looks really flat compared to this. That's because we compressed it. We'll hear the difference. So this is without compression. And this is with compression. So it's a little clearer, but the dynamic range of the waveform, how tall the peaks and valleys are, have gotten mushed down. Like we grabbed a sandwich and we crushed it down. We crushed the dynamic range of this. So we'll go back to our multitrack and you'll see, because we worked destructively, it affects it in the multitrack view. So now if we go back into this window, we can actually see in this section it's changed because we worked destructively in waveform. Now why would you do this? So for that, I would use, for an audio project where I'm recording a voice and maybe there's external noise, like I said, a fan, or your room doesn't have soundproofing, you'd want to use something to get rid of that noise. So I'd want to do that permanently to the track. I wouldn't want to hear noise, the hiss or the hum of a computer. So I would add a noise effect or noise reduction to get rid of that noise so I wouldn't hear that, and apply that permanently to the track. So when you're working in multitrack and you add effects, see, this is using some of your computer's processing power, which is fine, but after a certain time, you only have so much power you can use. So it'll start to slow down the processing. So you wouldn't have, 30 effects in each track. It'll eventually make your computer slow down because it can't handle all the processing power that's required. So you also have a media browser. This is the other way that you can import whether it's audio, video, or any materials you want to work on. You have your racks. Markers. Now markers are very helpful if there's a certain section of a project that you want to focus on. So maybe I wanted to make sure that I remembered to add an effect to this one section. You can add a marker on this portion of your project so you can remember to come back to it. I'm going to click this add cue marker, or press M. So at the very top here, there's this little marker now. So I can leave a note to myself, after a minute into the song, let's just put it on 1 minute. I want to make sure I check out this section. Maybe there's an issue with the audio in this section, so I can add markers and time reference to where my markers are so I know when to come back. So maybe I'm taking notation. The drums are too loud in this part, the piano's too quiet, so I know when to come back and make changes. Also, it's very important to label your tracks. So we haven't done that just yet. To do that, it's real simple. You just click in where by default it says track. I just clicked once and I'm going to call this drums. I'll call this guitar, or GTR for short. And I'm going to expand this down a little bit. I'm going to solo this. And that was a piano. So we're going to just call that piano. Okay. Now that we're all soloed, we know what everything is, we have it all labeled, we can continue on. You also have your properties of your track. It'll let you know the duration of your track, where your file's stored, any additional information, like if you did any time stretching. Mind you, don't worry about all this just yet. So if your track is too short and you wanted to, let's say you recorded a vocal and you wanted to retain the voice longer, you can make changes to that audio file and see the settings here. Match loudness, so as it says, you can drag and drop different media files here. So if I have a reference song that I want to match, and my song, I want that audio to be as loud as, I can use a reference file and it'll try its best to do that. So say I want to add reverb. Reverb essentially is adding room sound to a recording or audio file. If I record in a small room and I want it to sound like it's larger, it's a big stadium or something, right? I can go to my effects. I'm going to toggle that on. By default, it will turn on when you add an effect. So I'm going to say reverb. I'm just using all the default stuff that comes with this program, but you can download additional software. So I'm going to say in real time, I'm going to play this so you can hear it. I'm going to solo just the drums. Now notice the sound of the drums sound like they're in a different room. You can adjust the mix of how much of that effect is on there. So it's a dry mix. And this is a wet mix. So it's all effects that you're hearing. There's no original audio that you're actually hearing in it. It's all the effect. So these are all default settings that kind of give you a starting point. But ideally, you want to kind of fine tune it for your own project. So you can use this, and like I said, your recordings for music, or if you're doing a podcast and your vocals sound a little too dry, you just want to add a little something to it. You can use it with reverb. There's also things called delays, and there's different effects we can get into. So let's pretend we recorded our session and I didn't like this part of the drums. So I'm going to slide this over by using my move tool. So the jump you'll hear sounds obvious. So we want things to be more subtle. Let me move this over. I'm going to take off the reverb. You notice you hear that jump in the drums. It's very jarring. It's very audible. So to make this sound a little bit more smooth, we would add something called a fade. So let me get a little closer. So you'll see this little square that kind of has half of it grayed out and half black. So that's how I can adjust my fade. You'll see when I hover over it, it gives you an option of shortcuts. But I can click and drag, and all of a sudden there's this whole other little bar that pops up. And I'm still holding on to it, and I can adjust how the audio fades out. So I can make it a more gradual fade. And I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. I'm going to select it, and that square is popping up. I'm just going to click by the square. And for this, I'm going to make it a sharper fade. So it's going to be a little harder. So zoom back out. So why would you add a fade to something? So if you're recording a podcast, for instance, we'll go back to our original audio recording. I'm going to bring back in our very first recording. So all the material that we brought into this project will be in your little window over here. So our first little demo will be at the very bottom. And I'm just going to click and drag and bring our audio into this project. So I can hear that by playing. Hello, and welcome to this introduction to audio recording and editing. Hope you enjoy. Because we got rid of the coughs in the destructive editing window, or the waveform window, it's not showing up here. But say I wanted to get rid of the empty space at the beginning. Hello, or that little pop. Hear that pop? So we can easily make a selection of that area, hit delete, and it'll be gone. But you'll hear the jump in the empty space right there. So how do we get rid of that? We use a fade. So I'm going to click a little further back. You hear where the background noise kind of fades out, or it's audible and it's completely silent. So we'll add a fade there so it's a little more silent and a little more appealing to the ear here. Here we go. So I'll add a fade. So zoom out a little bit. Hello, and welcome to the fades into the project. And you can adjust that still, so don't worry if you want to go back. See, the square still pops up. So if you want to make an adjustment to that fade, you still can. Hello, and welcome to this introduction. See, the sound level kind of gradually, softly comes in. So you do that if you're working on any editing of your project or mixing. So yeah, but you have your fade, your cut, selection tool, move tool, panning, and gain. Your mute, solo, record buttons, your record button, play button, your windows. So you can also do something called amplification, which is just making your sound louder. Excuse me, making your sound louder. So I don't think I'm going to do it in this window because I don't want to use any more processing power. So I'm going to permanently apply it by double clicking our audio file and opening it up in the waveform window. So I'm going to make my selection of the part I want to affect. I'm going to go to Effects, Amplitude and Compression. I'm just going to say Amplify. So all this is doing is making my sound level louder. Hello, and welcome to this introduction to audio recording. So I'm going to add, let's see, we can look at our window here. We have a little room, so I'm going to add maybe 3 decibels of audio. I'm going to say Apply. So notice in this one section it's too loud, it's clipping. So I want it a little quieter than that. So I think instead I'm going to add some compression and a little bit of makeup gain. So we're going to say soft clipping or soft compression and a little less gain. Apply. So I made it louder, but it also squished it down. So if I hit undo and redo, you can see the little peaks and valleys have changed. And now that will affect our original recording. Now let's say we want to work on a video track. We can drag and drop that into our project here, or you can right click the video in a different project and open it in Adobe Audition.
Honda Prelude has been around the Honda generation since 1978, 2001 in those 20 years of span, and they've been
and apply the same effects. I almost forgot to mention, on your play bar at the very bottom, there's a button you can select called Loop Playback. So when I have that selected, it will just keep playing the same section on repeat. So I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to make a selection of just a little bit of my audio here. And it's going to keep looping that same part. If I toggle that off and hit play, it'll play the entire drum track in its entirety. Now, a few more buttons that we have on our top here. So if you hover over, you can change the input and output of your track. You can change the effects. It's like a shortcut to get to your effects. On that individual track, you can say where you want this to be sent to as a bus. And you can also change the EQ. I'm just going to turn that on. So when I double click that window, it brings up this EQ. So with EQ, you can actually fine tune and shape your sound. You'll notice some of these numbers on the bottom here changing. So again, we have our gain, meaning you can make something louder. You can make it quieter. You can change the frequency that it's affecting. So your highs will be to the right. Your lows, the bass, the boom, the stuff you feel in the club, the heavy sounds, those will be to the left. And you can also change the Q, which is also your width of it. So I'm just going to boost this up. And I'll start sliding the Q. Notice it gets more narrow. So it's affecting a slightly more narrow range of frequencies. And I can make it wider to do the opposite. I can bring it to the left. I'm going to hit play again. So it's affecting a broader range of those frequencies. So how this comes into play is if we're editing a sound and we have a very specific thing we want to get rid of. Let's say there's a very sharp noise around the 3K range in our voice. Maybe it's just a particular person who's talking or singing, and that range, it gets too sharp and it's harsh on the ears. So what you want to do is make your cue very narrow. So we're doing more retractive editing here. We're panning. We're finding that frequency range we don't like. Let's say around here is just, there's something about the audio that's just, it's hard to hear, it's distracting, and it doesn't add to it. We'll get rid of it by making it narrow and then lowering the gain a few decibels. So on the bottom, there's also these buttons here. You can toggle, that just allows you to toggle on and off your which EQ band you want to be active. Very left and right, you have something called high pass, which is what the HP stands for, and low pass. So low pass is allowing, or high pass allows any of the high frequencies to pass through. It's almost like that gate we were listening to earlier, where it's not letting any of that low sound through. And LP, or low pass, is the opposite. So with LP, it's getting rid of all the high frequencies. So now if I hit play, so now it's just all the bassy noises, all the low frequency ranges. So you have low pass and high pass. Again, I'm not expecting you to retain all this. We're just kind of covering it very briefly. You can see now in our little window all the changes we made to our EQ. And that, again, only affects this track by itself. Not any of the other drums, the piano, the guitar, just this track individually. However, if there's an effect you want to affect everything, let's say compression, you can add that to our master track. So same way we added our EQ to that individual track, we can do it to the overall track. Again, this would affect everything. I think before we go, I wanted to show you a little bit of automation though. So to do that, we're going to add a few dots by double clicking on the line here for our gain. And we're just going to fade this out. The track is faded out. Anyway, there's a lot to cover, but I just want to kind of touch base on a few things in this project.